Howdy, this is Geordie Prepper and welcome to another Prepper's Perspective. My special guest today is Pensif. Welcome to the show, Pensif. Great to have you.
Hello there, Geordie Prepper. Good to be on the podcast.
And we've kind of found each other on Steemit, and you just want to maybe introduce yourself and what you're involved with there.
Yeah, I only now use Steemit, so it's all about Steemit. When I first came across you, I used to follow you on YouTube when I was a keen YouTube watcher, but then when I found Steemit, I'm afraid YouTube went out the window, so I haven't been back there much for a while. But yeah, I've been on Steemit since last June, so that's about 8 months now. I'd previously been on one or two prepper forums, but that was about my main sort of prepping social media activity.
And you're very active on Steemit and the community of homesteading and prepping.
I when I first came onto Steemit, I came onto Steemit for homesteading and prepping because I'd been involved in the other forum, and so I sort of just jumped across and continued what I was doing there. And one thing I did early on, which sort of was great for networking, I drew up a list of homesteaders and preppers on Steemit and put that out, and that was really the thing that helped me get to know people and got me started. And I think in the beginning I scanned around and probably found about 50, 60 people that had mentioned homesteading or prepping, and now it's grown and grown. And now we have, I think it's well over 300 if I remember rightly, and it's growing really fast on Steemit, and it seems to be a very attractive place for homesteaders and preppers. I guess a lot of it is about sort of both being a decentralized platform and chance of earning a little bit of extra income from it, which attracts people a lot. So yeah, it's that's where I started, and since then I've followed that line. I'm still very involved in homesteading, but branched out into a few other areas, particularly now on MSP Waves Radio, and I run a show called the Alternative Lifestyle Show that I started 2 or 3 weeks back, covering homesteading, prepping, and a range of other topics, homeschooling and unschooling, tiny houses, renewable energy, vegan, vegetarian, a range of sort of different eating choices. So yeah, that's a lot of what I do at the moment.
And you mentioned prepper forums. I've never really got involved in forums to do with prepping. Is that a better experience, or what was your experience with the forums?
I look, I mean, in the States there are dozens and dozens of pretty active forums. I sort of looked there a bit, but it was, it's very different in the States prepping because of particularly obviously guns and the like. So I looked around for UK prepping forums, and I think I found 3 if I remember, but 2 were very low activity. And I found one, I won't mention it, but I think you might have been on it as well. I think so. And that had a fair bit of activity. I mean, there would be posts every day, but it was quite a small bunch of people that really drove it, and it didn't seem to have a lot of flexibility or room for expansion in any way. And I did get to the point of posting a daily, I guess it would be a blog in effect, but a daily sort of forum posting about what was going on there. But then Steemit came along, and I sort of jumped across and took the same with me. I was sort of going to tell people on the forum about Steemit, but they're very, 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 very unkeen in terms of having people mention other places to go. So I don't think they permitted that. So that forum, I still pop across that forum every so often, but it's quite a small. I think there was a sort of core group of maybe 20, 30 people at most on it. Whereas Steemit opened up the whole world, really, and there's still not a large number of people in Britain, preppers or homesteaders in Britain on Steemit, but it's growing, and the access to people often in the States, which is where the biggest bulk of people are, but all over the world. So I know people from Bulgaria, Australia, El Salvador. I mean, it's anywhere and everywhere that people I connect with here now, which is one of the things I find most fascinating, most interesting, most exciting, really, because you you get totally different perspectives on the world by talking to people in different countries. Particularly, one of the things, of course, is the sort of the money side of it, where, and I might have mentioned before, but places like Venezuela, where, and this is the thing I often quote, but it really puts it in perspective. I've got to know some people in Venezuela, and totally by chance in Britain, the minimum hourly wage for an adult, which I think is £7.50, so that's about $10. That's our hourly wage, our minimum hourly wage, which is the same as the minimum monthly wage in Venezuela, and that really
wow.
that really puts it in perspective to me. And I also got to know some people in Indonesia, in Aceh, where they had the big tsunami, and then more recently had an earthquake again, I think.
So was the allure of was that the monetary incentive that was giving them, or was it just the...
Yes, totally, because, in Britain and whatever, I've only got, 50 cents on a post, or I've only got $1 on a post, and that to us doesn't have enough impact. But of course, if you're in a country where a day's work is $2, then to go and earn 50 cents on a post, well, that's cool. Or to get $2 on a post, even better. And particularly, I think it's young people in those countries. You've probably seen posts about it in colleges and those. They've got smartphones. They've got a certain level of understanding about technology, and they'll have some level of English, or may not, maybe in their own local language. But particularly in West Africa, there's a lot of English spoken, and they're away, and there's no barrier or no doubt or anything. It's like Steam is there. I've got a smartphone. I can get an account. I can post stuff, whatever I fancy, and I'm earning as much as my mum or dad will earn in a day. I can make one post and get that with ease. So there's absolutely no barrier to them wanting to go on Steam it. So the numbers are increasing massively, and that's, I find, really exciting, not particularly from a prepping point of view, but from I guess, is it social justice? I mean, the sort of idea moving towards the sort of idea of the universal basic income, which some people are for, some people are against. And often people, we can't have that because you've got to do lots of taxation. Well, what if you could have that without taxation and through something like the Steam blockchain? I mean, that becomes really exciting. And then if you take that into a sort of prepping context, it's obviously in Western countries that the economics are a bit different. But if you could get independence from the state, from work or whatever, and be able to earn a base income from Steam, and then get on with your homesteading and prepping or whatever, that really has an interesting twist in it to me, because you can sort of do that sort of disconnecting from the grid, and not just the electricity grid, but the grid as a whole. And last week on the radio show, I interviewed White Walking Feather, which I don't know if you've met him or read much about him, but I think you were there. You were listening to the interview as well. And
yeah, he's actually joined my prepper service, so I'm really hoping to have some conversations with him. He's a really interesting individual.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'd heard of off-grid in terms of having your own electricity supply and stuff, but it was when I was reading his posts that I started to get this wider idea of being off-grid, because so much so now, and rapidly increasing, we're sort of hooked into this. It's an all-encompassing grid, isn't it? I mean, it's everything you buy online, everything is tracked, and things like smart meters they're trying to get here, and then they know what how, when you're using electricity, what for, and so on and so forth, and everything is just depending on your view of the world, of whether you're totally innocent and think, well, I'm sure they're not doing anything untoward with that information, or maybe they are. I tend to be on the maybe they are side of things, and if I can avoid sort of being in somewhere where I'm tracked, I will. It is getting increasingly difficult.
It's very invasive, I find, and
yeah,
you're right. I mean, the younger people, they just accept it because they've grown up with a phone in their hands, and at the beginning of the internet and the web, we were told, not to give out any personal information at all.
Yeah.
And yet now they're basically saying that if you don't give out your personal information, then you don't have all this sort of really amazing things, integration into society, and then
Exactly.
and then younger people look at you kind of funny, like if you don't have a Facebook profile, which I find really weird as well. But regards to prepping and homesteading, do you think there's more people doing it now, or are people just sharing that they are doing it?
In the UK, I can't say I've seen much of an uptick. The sort of golden days of the 70s and the good life and the like, there was that boom. An interesting thing of where I live in West Wales, that brought lots of people into West Wales, and now they're the second and third generation of that group of people that came here for the ideals of the 70s. There are a lot of people around, and some of them have stayed in that sort of true ideology of trying to be self-sufficient, but most have been absorbed into it. But you do tend to recognise the second and third generation of those people. Generally, though, I mean, people, I don't know whether it's translated into, oh, well, we buy organic veg, which is a very good thing. And we've done our bit because we bought organic veg, or we've subscribed to Amnesty International or something. I don't know. People seem to find a little way of saying, oh, I've done my thing. Not bad. I mean, it's better that everyone does something than nothing, but it sort of tends to stop there. It's like, yeah, I've done that. I've done my bit for the environment. I've bought organic veg from Waitrose or whatever. Nothing wrong with that, and I would applaud it. But that's where it sort of stops. In terms of prepping in Britain, it's tricky. I'm not seeing a lot of sign of growth, but I don't go looking for people prepping in Britain. Although I don't, sometimes if you're about doing it, you will interact and bump into people. But even in West Wales, which is an area ripe for that, I don't see a growth of it. There's the people here that do it, but it's not like year on year. I'm thinking, oh, there's more than there were last year.
But what about like on Steam? You're doing the alternative lifestyle show. Are people? What sort of numbers are you getting contacting you, wanting to be on the show? Is there a lot of interest?
I've not got a shortage of people wanting to come on, which is good, because when I first thought of the idea, that was one of the big fears: is, oh, am I going to be able to find anyone that wants to come and talk? Which is partly why I sort of. Well, not partly. I mean, I cover the whole alternative lifestyle spectrum, because people often sort of go in many parts of it. They might be vegan, they might be homesteaders, they might have renewable energy. So I cover that whole spectrum, and most people tick several of those categories, regardless of whether they're into prepping, homesteading, etc. The general mindset of people on Steam, I think, is a little bit alternative. Full stop. In the broadest spectrum of society, people are, I would say, a bit more questioning, I think, on Steemit than you go on somewhere like Facebook. Yeah.
So if you tried to do the alternative lifestyle show strictly on Facebook, it would have flunked, do you think? Or
you would have got a load of aggro, I think. People haggling and hassling you and it wouldn't have been the same. I think people on Steemit are willing to. Well, they have a questioning. They start from a questioning point of view of the world. It's like, yeah, what we're told is not necessarily the right thing, and that, of course, is because it is a decentralized platform, and that has attracted people. Whether that will change as it gets mass adoption, I don't know. But I think certainly early adopters on Steam are very much of a questioning mindset, which is good. I feel people on Facebook may have a slightly different, let's say, a more accepting view of the world and an unquestioning view of the world. And I think that's the key bit for. Do you question what is put in front of you? Do you question what you see on the mainstream media? Or do you think, yeah, that's fine? Or do you think, hang on, that doesn't add up? And that's, to me, the whole story. I mean, I look at the mainstream news and stuff, but I look at 100 other sources as well. And, somewhere in between, you get to the bit that is what you hope to be the truth. But for people that just take the mainstream media and say, oh, yeah, that's what the world is, I don't have any question with this. And I'm sure, you as well as I know many people that are like that. And sometimes, I mean, in the past, I would try and, I wouldn't say challenge them, but try and say, well, hey, think about this, what about this? I don't do that as much now, because I wouldn't say I've given up, but it's like, I've said it before, you'll find out at some point.
So,
and it's,
I mean,
yeah, go on.
do you think Do you think people just kind of shying away from, people who are like taken in with the world as it's seen through mainstream media? Do you think they have like an aversion to self-sufficiency almost?
Yeah, I mean that sort of they'll get as far as growing a few veg in the garden, again an excellent thing, and doing a bit of organic shopping. But when you, I mean, I can't really talk about my family, but I suspect a lot of people have family members that think they're a bit nuts. Let's put it that. And when it's like, well, I'm trying to grow all my veg for a whole year. It's like, why? You can shop on Tesco online. So why do you want to grow your own veg? Why not? And particularly when you get into prepping stuff. I mean, I have quite good food stocks, and other family members will say, why do you do that? You can just order it each week. They can't see the bigger picture, and I try to explain it, but it goes nowhere. So, I suspect for every good prepper and homesteader, they've got a member of the family that really doesn't get it. Some people may be lucky that their family get it as well, but I don't know about you, but I would be in the category that, for every good prepper, there's at least one member of the family that really doesn't get it.
So the response that you're talking about, do you think it's very much been shaped by mainstream media or and other social platforms? Because like I've heard it from other preppers before and homesteaders that, when they try and talk about this self-sufficient lifestyle, they meet a huge amount of resistance. Can decentralized platforms not only offer a place for people to talk about this sort of thing, but could there be a place which kind of cuts through this stigma almost?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I sort of, when I first started on Steam, I was still trying to work out gain confidence, work out where it was going and where I was going. So I didn't really talk to many people about it. Now, particularly because of having the meetup in Wales and trying to develop the people on it platform in Wales, I sort of talk to people more. I don't. Sometimes it's quite easy to get a little bit evangelical about it, but I sort of rein myself in. But if people show it the slightest bit of interest, I will tell them about it now. And again, some people get it, some people don't, and it's hard. If they really don't, it is hard to convince them that there is a different way, and they just don't see the point of it unless you very bluntly just talk about the money. But I don't like to say, come on here, you're going to earn. That's something I don't want to do, because most people won't earn a lot of money at all, or certainly not for the first few months. You don't really pick up steam, so to speak.
Plus if they came to the platform and they didn't earn, then they'd probably just leave it, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so I avoid going about just about the money. I try and get in the wider thing. It's uncensored and decentralized and all that, which that is a problem then for people who are coming from the very simple view of the world, the Facebook type people, because it's like, I don't care. I'm not bothered about censorship. I'm not censored on Facebook. And of course, if you try and tell them they are, that's another story. But so the only way you can possibly access those people is talking about money, which, as I say, I don't want to. So I'm still trying to work out the best way of introducing Steam and Steam it to people, and it is different for different people, and you just have to modify it and gradually sort of get in the feel for how it does or doesn't work. A good starting point. I mean, locally there are people that are got homesteads or sort of beekeepers or whatever. That there's some little access point that I try to move on, and that's working a bit. If they've got a foot in the door, so to speak, in terms of their lifestyle, that does make it easier, because you can talk about the wider story than just about the money. And so that's where I'm tending to try and aim for at the moment. Just sort of look for anyone around that is got maybe into permaculture, or they're into growing, or that sort of point of access that, just through networks, people, not full-on preppers, although sometimes people, that's the wonderful thing of prepping, that people may be a full-on prepper and you probably don't know, because not everyone goes around with a badge on their hat saying, hey, I'm a prepper. In fact, most preppers probably don't. And if you are a good prepper, you probably almost certainly don't say, "Hey,
Yeah, I was just going.
I'm in Preppers United. Do you want to join me?" You don't do it as a prepper, so it's always tricky. I've met people around here that you sort of get that little feel. It's like, oh, they make their own knives. I mean, a guy that makes knives. That's interesting. Why is it? Wonder why is you just have that little inkling, and you think, hey, this guy could be a prepper. So you sort of start slightly manoeuvring around, if you get what I mean, because you don't want to just say, hey, mate, are you into prepping? Because you can't do that. So you've got to edge around the conversation and just sort of work the angles. And then hopefully at some mutual point, you both think, you're a prepper, aren't you? And that's an interesting, I don't know whether you've had it, but it's an interesting, it's not a game, but it's a sort of a protocol for preppers, really, isn't it? That you can't just outright saying, hey, are you a prepper? So you have to sound them out, get an idea of their views, and gradually you get towards it. And I have sort of met a couple of people now that have turned out to be preppers around here, but it took quite a process to to sort of get there before that became apparent.
I think mainstream media is kind of the reason for that, the reluctance for people to mention that they are preppers, though. But like on Steam, you're very much involved with MSP Waves and really giving people a platform to talk about their homesteading and the prepping. So, I mean, how many preppers have actually approached you, and how many homesteaders? Is there a big difference in how open people want to be with the show?
Generally, generally on Steam, it from when I've done the lists, I think. Well, there's quite particularly in the States, possibly more than here. There's quite a chunk of people that are both preppers and homesteaders. But often on Steam, they won't declare the prepping bit. You sort of find that out through reading odd posts or talking to them. They will declare themselves as homesteaders openly, but not necessarily preppers. But very roughly, I would say the numbers are about 3-1 of homesteaders to preppers. But there is that big grey area of people that are homesteaders and don't declare that they're preppers as well. And that probably, certainly in terms of the show, I've had more homesteaders sort of contact me or talk to me about being on it than preppers. Preppers is a very small number, which might actually be one or two maybe, and you're one of them. So yeah, I haven't had a rush of preppers, partly because, as we said, I mean, prepping isn't something you wave around and say, hey guys, I'm a prepper. It's just part of being a prepper. You don't, so it may not be a comfortable fit for many people that are preppers to go out there, particularly if they've already sort of fairly, I won't say revealed themselves, but if through the course of making posts, you do tend to bits and pieces of material or bits and pieces of information do come out in the course of posts. And if someone wanted to systematically analyze most people's posts, you probably get a fair idea of where they are and possibly even who they are if you wanted to. So if people have given away what town they're in or whatever, then they might not want to go the next step and say, oh, also I'm a prepper. So that may be why they hold back. The show's only on its third week, so it's still early days, and maybe as people get more comfortable with it, we might get more preppers come forward to go on it.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting show and an interesting platform, and the guests that you've already have are really, really interesting. And it's quite a very wide variety of topics you've already covered and discussed, really, isn't it?
I mean, this week we've got, I think we've got 2 more homesteaders. Quickly have a look on the list. We've got 2 this week, although I think this will go out after this week, so I won't mention the names, but we've got 2, we've got one that's a homesteader, one's a homeschooler and a homesteader, another homesteader, a sort of environmental political activist, and who's into veganism and other wider issues as well. So that's the mix for this week. Next week we've got, which I think will be the week when this comes out, I'm not sure when you've got it planning to come out, but we've got an urban homesteader, which is a slight different variation of homesteading, and a couple more homesteaders, and someone I think soon we're going to have that lives in a RV, a tiny house. And I'm keen to get that sort of widest range of topics. I mean, another area I'd be keen to hear from people that are well into sort of renewable technologies and complementary health, a couple of alternative health, a couple of more areas I'd like to get people on the show as well.
And, this is, for many people on the outside of this type of lifestyle, self-sufficiency. And your show's called The Alternative Lifestyle Show, but for people who are living this life, it's not really an alternative. It's a traditional way of living. Because, it wasn't that long ago in Great Britain that you would come across people who were growing things anyways in their gardens, and it was promoted and encouraged during the Second World War. So is this not going back to our roots, kind of a more traditional way?
Exactly. I mean, when I first had the idea for the show, it was actually called the Alternative Lifestyle Show, but I had brackets around the word alternative purposely to make the point that for people on the outside, they see it as alternative, but for people doing it on the inside, it's the norm. So if you and I are talking, really, it's not alternative. It's not an alternative for us. It's the normal lifestyle show. So it's only alternative for people outside, and for all the people that come on the show, that is the norm to a lesser or greater degree. In terms of going back, I'm well in my 50s, and I remember my granddad, who came from Wales. In fact, I can see where he worked over the way and where he met my grandmother in the farm opposite. He came from a sort of rural background, and when he did move into over into the east of England, he still had a very large garden. And when I was young and he was still alive, he had something, I think, about half an acre, and that was just his way of being. He grew lots of vegetables because that's how, what people from the countryside did. And it's interesting because where I live now, by a quirk of fate and circumstance, which we didn't know when we bought it, it had been a derelict farm, and then it got partially renovated, and we're doing some more. It was actually built by my mother's family in 1799. And then they lived in it until the 1950s. But I didn't know that when I bought it. And
wow.
It's because my mother died when I was young, and they left it in 1958, and someone bought it just for the land. And so they left the house derelict. And then I found out afterwards, because a lady that lived nearby told me who used to live here, and I thought, that's interesting. That's my mum's aunt. And so it all got connected back together. And then when my father saw the place, the totally weird thing was that I'd actually been here when I was 7, because we were going to move back here when my mum was ill. And we actually came to look at this place, but my mum didn't, because she was too ill. So my dad and I came when I was 7, and to this very same place. And at that point, it was totally derelict. It was like too big a job, because I remember there was a cow in the living room and a tree growing in the hallway. It had been left 30 years on. And so that was, and I didn't recognise that when we bought the place, because it had all been done up now. And it was only after my dad saw it, he told me that. And that was just, super weird, really.
It's amazing how it's came back into the family. And
yeah, it is just super weird. I knew my mum came from this area because we used to come a lot when I was young, but I hadn't got filled in that gap bit. And as I say, I can see the farm over the way where my nana lived, and her family employed my granddad to be at the time, who was a ploughman, so they sort of took him on a contract. For 200 odd years, my mother's family lived here in a totally, more or less self-sufficient way. They had, and my great aunt has told me that there used to be a pig house here and a duck house here, and that's what they did. Their land was, it's not great land here was, but they grew oats and things for the animals, and so that's a very weird sort of direct connection that my mum's family did, but of course they didn't say, "Oh, you're a homesteader." They went, "Oh, you're self-sufficient." Well, you're self-sufficient because that's what you did at that time. It wasn't a big deal. You didn't go online to Tesco's and order whatever. I mean, that's just what you did as a rural family in West Wales. You made your own butter, you made your own cheese. There's a big hook in the living room from the ceiling, which is where they hung the bacon, and that's what you did, because it was a sort of kitchen living room, and the old range is there. And the hook has a particular interest to me, because when I was young and we used to go and visit, in fact, that same great aunt who's got another farm near here, and when I was young, they would hang their bacon in the kitchen, sort of kitchen living room. And when I was apparently about 5 or 6, they took me there, and I sort of embarrassed my parents because I looked up and said, "Look, there's mouldy bacon hanging up." But of course, it wasn't mouldy; it was just bacon hanging up. But I was used to bacon coming in a packet, and my dad will always remind me of that. But the hook, we got a hook here, the same, which was used for hanging bacon. So it's sort of a really weird thing that when I'm here, being a homesteader, in fact, all I'm doing is what they did 60 or 70 years ago in the same place with my mother's family. So it's just a totally weird thing. And then when the rest of my family come here, who, as I say, I have a different view on the world, they can't make that connection. If anyone knows how to get your non-believers, non-believing family members to accept the way of the prepper, do let me know, because I haven't cracked it yet.
I think if anyone really did work out that formula, I think they'd be very rich indeed. But but how important do you think shows like yours are to get people to hear about this lifestyle? The audience that are coming to that are obviously probably going to be coming from Steam It or some alternative platform. But when people hear these sorts of lifestyles, do you think it's something that's going to stir something in them to want to get involved in it, or do you think the majority of people it's just going to go over their head?
I think there's a chance, because, well, I've been watching sort of who comes in the audience. We only know from the actual people when they come on Discord, and they may be on Twitch or whatever, so we don't know. But the people that come on Discord, I sort of look down the list of who's on there, and probably a third or so are people I recognise the names of from the homesteading community, the prepping community, and so they're there because they're interested in, they know the people on the show or whatever. So, and then the rest are people that either have so far no particular interest in it, or they might be closet preppers and thinking of having a go, or thinking of trying veganism or whatever. And so they're a third of them, I think, probably are people that have got an inkling to want to know a bit more because it's interesting, and then probably a third are just people that happen to be there and listening to the show. And I hope those people will pick up on some of the stuff being talked about, and yeah, that's interesting, I'll have a go. And going back to this thing about that people on Steam It generally have an open mind, in from what I've seen, that people be a bit more receptive. There is a good chance that those people that in the two other thirds may just think, well, that guy seems to have an interesting idea, or that woman sort of got some cool ideas there. They may just pick up on it and read a few posts and explore it. And of course, one of the good things with Steam, it's not just in isolation to have a radio show and it's like you listen to it in the car and then you forgot about it, because you can go off and read some posts. And I know always with the guests always try and put a couple of posts of what they're doing on there as well. So there's another access point that is like, oh, this person talking sounds interesting, I'm going to go and have a look at some of their posts. So that there is potentially an easy route for people just to go a little bit further and find out about whatever the person is talking about through their posts. So I'm hopeful that it does get the message out there, the ideas out there, and people pick up on it.
Where do you see yourself on Steam in maybe a year or two?
I sort of got involved in a number of different tracks. I mean, the homesteading is where I started, and that's a sort of mainstay of what I do, and that's evolved into the radio show, and I enjoy doing the radio thing, partly because it's fun in itself, but partly I just find it a fantastically good way to be able to talk to people in a bit more depth than you can do just by reading posts, and find out their ideas that I may not have thought of, and explore ideas. So the radio side of it I really enjoy. I've also done a bit of looking at how Steam It can be used for raising funds for not particularly just charities, but sort of charitable causes that's had varying success. But I do think that's a sort of untapped resource so far, that using the Steam blockchain as a way of raising money for things that people wouldn't easily be able to raise money for in other ways has an awful lot of potential has still got to be explored. I'm not that sure that any organisations or causes or individuals have quite got it right how they do it, but I mean, that's sort of a topic for another conversation. But so charities side of it is one I do, and the other thing I'm particularly interested in, partly because of what I do in my sort of day job, is the whole idea of what I term Steam commerce, which is can we take Steam outside of Steam and the Steam blockchain and start to trade between each other in Steam, which is actually a bit of the whole sort of prepping, homesteading alternative idea that, you know, could we bypass traditional monetary systems, and, you know, why do we need to do that when we could potentially actually just trade amongst ourselves? So that whole idea of finding businesses that are willing to take payments in Steam, I find a fascinating idea of where it might go. I mean, it opens up some fantastically interesting possibilities with all sorts of connotations that we don't need to talk about. But, you know, that idea that can you step out of the rigorous confines of having credit cards and bank accounts and all that stuff? Can you come out of that? And that goes back to White Walking Feather's ideas of disconnecting from the grid again. You know, the grid, as he said, is not about just disconnecting from the electricity grid; it's about disconnecting the financial grid from those. And that idea of disconnecting from the financial grid is one that is why I'm sort of interested in that sort of Steam commerce idea. Can we trade amongst ourselves using Steam as a currency? Is that possible? And particularly within the realms of preppers, homesteaders, because we've got a common base of understanding of a way of thinking, and, you know, potentially there's a receptiveness for people to think, yeah, I trust this person, because trust in everything is important, but in this sort of area, you know, you've got to know the people, you've got to trust them, and the common bond is the Steam blockchain, so to speak. And could I buy a pig from someone for Steam? I don't know. There's an interesting challenge. Can I buy a pig for Steam? I don't think I can at the moment, that I know of. But could I buy a pig for Steam? There's the challenge. And that just, you know, because of course then you can earn the Steam without having to be connected to the job grid, the corporate grid. You can be outside of that. You can earn your Steam within Steam blockchain, and you can buy your pig with Steam if that's what you want to do. But, you know, that to me just fascinates me in terms of the potential of that whole idea. And it comes into the other thing I'm sort of involved in, is trying to develop Steam at a local level, and the idea of the local community network based on Steam, because that sort of overlaps in the idea of local currencies. And one of the, when I started as a prepper, I mean, I'll jump around a bit here, but it's relevant. When I started as a prepper, I was a sort of isolationist prepper, if you get what I mean. It's like I did my stuff, I've got my gear, I've got all my stores, I've got everything stashed away, and I sort of stopped there. And it was only probably, I think probably 3 or 4 years ago, and there was something that triggered it, and I can't quite remember what it was. Oh, I know what triggered it. Yes, the book 1 Second After. I read that, and that really triggered something for me in a sustainable way. You know, if there was a scenario where it all had to come into play, you've really got to be part of a community, because, you know, you can have all your gear, you can have the rest of it, but, you know, where does that go? You can't live like that forever, ever. So then that got me into the whole idea of sort of building local community networks, not necessarily prepping ones, but community networks. Because if things did go bad, you're going to have to sort of work with your local community and have to rely on other people, because you're not going to be able to, you know, in the States, of course, people will pile high the guns and all the rest of it, which, alas, in Britain we can't do. So how do you, we have a fairly isolated property here, how would we defend that? And if we were just by ourselves, it'd be difficult. But if the next farm, you know, we were connected with, and the next one, and we knew everyone, and, you know, we have CB radios, or we have little walkie-talkies or whatever, that we had range, we could talk to each other. We'd have a bit of sustainability as a sort of community in any sort of bad scenario. So that's the added dimension of prepping for me, is about building communities as well. And Steam, I think, has a fantastic potential to add another layer to that, and you can bring in the sort of local currency and all that idea, which I'm surely rambling here. I don't know if I've lost people, but it's given me a new dimension. Prepping is what I'm about. It's, as I say, I sort of started as the isolationist type prepping model, and now I'm very much about local community prepping, if you get what I mean.
And of course, your radio show is really an extension of that, isn't it? Wanting to build and broadcast.
Yes, it's a sort of global network, a global community, really. But
yeah, and what day is your radio show on, and what time? Where can people find it if they want to listen to these people exploring these alternative lifestyles?
Yep, it's Fridays. It's 10 p.m. to midnight UTC. Which by chance is current UK time, so it's easy for me. But I think the States are 5, 6, 7, 8 hours behind that, depending where they are across the States and the other way. But yeah, it's 10 p.m. to midnight UTC, and it's on MSP Waves, which you can find either through their website, which is mspwaves.com, or from there there's a link to the Twitch stream, so you can watch it there. There's also VLC, or the commonest way is to go into the channel on Discord, on the PAL Discord server, and you can track down the radio show in there. Or look on any of my posts, and I usually have posts with all the details as well.
Yeah, and of course I'll leave all these details down below so people can find you. But it's been a really interesting and great conversation, and
I didn't get carried away with rambling away.
No, but I would really recommend people to check it out, and and see the different guests that Pennsif has, because it's all very interesting stuff. So this has been Geordie Prepper, and this has been Prepper's Perspective. Thank you very much to my special guest Pennsif.
Yeah, it's been great having a chat here, and so I hope I didn't ramble too much, but yeah, I've totally enjoyed it. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
No, it's been really great, and be safe, everyone, and be prepared. See you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.